Good evening. It's nice that so many of you are here tonight. This is usually the place of Judy Barshaman, who's our children's librarian, who's a very outgoing and a wonderful speaker, but she copped out on me tonight, so I get to introduce Linda. I'm delighted to do that. But before I do, I want to be sure and thank all of you who brought the cookies. As you know, we shared some Amish recipes, and some of you came in and got them, and those of you that just brought your own, that's fine. It's wonderful food. So after the program, and Linda's going to speak, and then I understand she's going to have questions from you if you want, and she expects that, so get ready. Linda is currently a teacher in the graduate program in professional writing at Maharishi University of Management. The book she is going to talk about tonight is Visits with the Amish, Impressions of the Plain Life. She's going to talk about her experiences inside the churches, the homes, and the schools there. We're delighted to have you, Linda. And I'm just going to let you start talking.
Thank you, Dina. And just to make clear, you want me to do an hour, including the questions, right? That's what we said.
That's
good.
Fine.
Good. Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you. I really consider this a great honor to be asked to be here tonight to speak to all of you, especially because I have such a high regard for all of our library staff and our library as a whole. I think it's just the most terrific library, and I'm using this chance to say thank you to the whole staff, to Dina and everyone, because I really feel that we have an amazing staff here, not just this beautiful building, which is wonderful to walk into, but also I feel like our staff is really special. Not only are they very knowledgeable, but they're extremely in love with books, and I think you feel that when you come in. And also, I feel like the policies are all geared to serve us, not to just serve them. For instance, I found out in going to other libraries across the country doing research for various things that not every library even has a grace period, and we have a 5-day grace period here at our library. And I think that just speaks for the great generosity of spirit that kind of makes us all feel at home here. So I just want to say thanks. So I want to just start out by telling you a little bit about my book. It's called Visits with the Amish, Impressions of the Plain Life, and it's available here at the library. And actually it came out about 2 years ago. But I really spent about 13 years writing it, not full-time, but kind of among doing other things. And the way I got started was that I was a graduate student at the university, at Maharishi University of Management, and I had an assignment. I was a graduate student in writing, in professional writing. And one of our assignments was that we were supposed to write a letter to a query letter to a magazine every month. And that's how you sell magazine articles. You write the letter first, you pitch your idea, and then if they say yes, you go ahead. Well, I was flipping through the Writer's Market, which is this huge, thick book, which we also have at the library, which writers use because it has all the listings of all the magazines in the country. And so I was flipping through trying to get some ideas. I was completely, I had to do the letter by the next day or something, it's due. And I came across, for some reason I was in the trade magazine section, I came across a listing for Roofer Magazine, which is a magazine for the roofing profession in America. And all of a sudden it clicked. I thought, gosh, you know, those Amish people are putting up these roofs on our dormitories. I don't know if any of you remember, this was back in 1985, but on the campus there are these very flat buildings called the fraternities, frats, they're dorm buildings. And an Amish construction company came in and in a day would do the entire roof from start to finish, all the way to the shingles. And these are very big buildings. And to me, it looked like a barn raising. So I thought it was kind of fascinating. So I just wrote this little letter. And they wrote back and they said, well, it just so happens we're celebrating the 200th anniversary of the roofing profession in America. So we'd like your story to be the cover story. So, of course, I got a lot of ribbing from my fellow classmates who were writing to Glamour and all these other magazines, because my first publication was Roofer Magazine. But anyway, it was nice. Actually, that movie Witness had just come out, and so he said, he got the article and he said, well, could you just add something in there about Witness? So I said, I don't know, I said something like, oh, it was just like a scene from the movie Witness. That was my first line or something. And then he also wrote back and he said, you know, we don't usually get articles that are this well written for Roofer magazine, but but what we do need is we have to have some specifications, like what kind of nails did they use and what kind of tar paper. So anyway, it was nice. This is actually a picture of a boy with sunglasses on, and in the reflection of the sunglasses is a Amish horse and buggy, or field horses. And then this was the article, which was really fun for me to write. But in writing this article, I got to know the head of the construction crew. And he was an Amish man from Bloomfield, Iowa, which, as you probably all know, is south of Ottumwa. It's about a 40-minute drive from here. And as you know, the Amish don't drive, but they do ride in vans. So they would hire a driver, this Amish construction crew, and be driven all the way to Fairfield every day and back. And they'd work on the roofs on campus. Well, Monroe Hirschberger was a really, really nice person and really outgoing. He liked to joke and laugh, and this was, I was thinking when I was preparing this talk that really my talk a little bit is about how all my myths about the Amish kind of got shattered. And my first myth was that the Amish people were very solemn and very, you know, kind of stern. And Monroe shattered that myth immediately because he wasn't at all like that. He was very fun-loving and liked to tease and laugh. So anyway, I got to know him, and I did a profile of him for the local paper, the Iowa Source. And then, and getting to know him, I asked, well, could I and my classmates, could we come out to your farm sometime and visit you? I guess I got to know him well enough to ask him, and he said, sure, we'd love it. So actually, Mary Zilbeck just came in, was one of my classmates then. And she and I and some other friends went out to the farm. And then I wrote about that for the Iowa Source. And then Mary had been reading in a writing magazine, I was still a student, that's some children's magazine called Cobblestone, which maybe some of you know about. It's a history magazine for children. Was doing a theme issue on the Amish and wanted some articles. So I wrote to them, and they said, yes, send us. So what I did, actually, this is kind of a secret, but I had this big article for the Source, which was about 5,000 words, and all I did was cut it back in words. I took a section of it and sent it to Cobblestone. I didn't actually change the wording at all, even though this is for 4th grade children. But that's a secret of newspaper writing, that they say that most newspaper writing is on the 4th grade level, actually, which is interesting. But anyway, so they accepted 2 of my articles, and that kind of started a whole other chain of events, which was really interesting. One thing was that one of the articles, it was called A Day in the Life of the Amish, was bought by Scott Forsman and Company. You know, they're the ones who do the readers, and they, in their 4th grade reading book, put A Day with the Amish, my article. So that was one nice result. But the other more far-reaching result was that the editor of Plain magazine, I don't know, probably not many of you have heard of this magazine. It's a very small magazine that was only published for a few years. And the editor was trying to find a person to write young people's story, and he was doing some research because he was just starting this magazine, which was about plain people, for plain people, like such as Quakers and Amish and Hutterites and that. And he happened to read that article in Cobblestone of mine, and he wrote to me and asked me to be the young people's editor and to write some articles. So I started doing that, and this is, for instance, this one called The Amish Schoolhouse. I went to an Amish family, with an Amish family to school in Bloomfield. And the editor of Plain magazine, Scott Savage, was really quite instrumental in forming my book, because he said, you know, you're going to be writing all these articles. Why don't you write each one on a different aspect of Amish life, and then you can put it together as a book. And so basically, over about 10 years, I wrote well, actually by then only about 4 years, wrote for articles for Plain magazine, and then combined with the other ones that I had already done, I put them together in a book, and it was published by Iowa State University Press. And actually, the interesting thing about this was that all of my articles were written for children's magazines, or in the case of Plain, it was an adult magazine, but it was written, it was supposed to be the column for young people. But for some reason, when Iowa State University Press, I told them that, you know, but when they bought it, they made it into a book for adults. And but actually a lot of people say that they like the fact that it's easy to read and it's kind of has a lot of sensory details and kind of a feeling of you are there, which works with children, but I think it works with adults as well. And one of the best things that I found in doing the whole thing was that I got these woodcuts. I was able to buy these woodcuts very inexpensively from Mary Azarian. And this also happened through Plain Magazine. She had done a lot of the woodcuts for the magazine, and he told me that that she would sell them to me very inexpensively. And it turns out that just the year before, right after that, the year before my book came out, but after I had already purchased them, she became the Caldecott Medal winner for Snowflake Bentley. And I don't know if you know this book, it's available at the library, but it's a children's book, beautiful children's book, written by an Iowan, Jacqueline Briggs Martin, and illustrated by Mary Azarian, who's from Vermont, but these lovely woodcuts. So I thought that was really special that she did the woodcuts for my book too. That was nice. So I want to now just talk a little bit about some of the people that I met, some of the Amish women that I met, and just some of my experiences being with the Amish people. And I just want to say that if I sound like I'm only bringing out the positives, I did do that a lot in my book. And the reason was that it was like I was visiting. It's called Visits with the Amish. I was a guest in their homes. I felt that these people really opened up their homes to me and were very honest and very open with me in very many ways, which I'll explain. And I guess when you're a guest, you really just don't start looking for the negatives. You just enjoy your experience. And so I just wanted to share my experience. And as I explained in the introduction, there are, of course, negatives in the Amish lifestyle, just as there are in anyone's lifestyle. But I think, and I can talk about that tonight as well, but it doesn't mean that I want to be Amish or that I think that I could join the Amish or something like that. It's just that I do appreciate them for what they do and just for how they are and just for being such an anomaly in our modern world. And also, I want to say, if anyone has any questions at any time, please feel free to ask. There'll be time at the end as well, but if something pops in your head, that's fine. So one of the first Amish women I met was Katie Yoder. Actually, I met her years later. Monroe Hirschberger had already left and gone to Illinois. So I made contact with another construction company head who maybe some of you know, Irving Gingrich. He did quite a bit of work in Fairfield. He and his team, I think, or no, it was Monroe's team who built some of the buildings, the Overland Sheepskin building and different things. But Irvin had done a lot of work in people's homes too. And he did some work on campus, so I got to know him, and he introduced me to the Yoder family. But the first time that I drove up to their farm, they didn't know that I was coming. And they didn't know who I was. I just had been to Irvin's house and, sort of prevailed on him to tell me somebody, because I had to write this magazine article about children who worked with farm animals. That was the topic. And so he took a really long time, but he finally thought of someone who would like to do that. So I drove up to the Yoder farm, and outside there was a young woman mowing the lawn. Her name was Ida May, although in the book the names were changed. It's sometimes confusing to me to remember them, so I'll just say their real names. But anyway, Ida May, she waved, and then she turned off her lawnmower and came to talk to us. And then we went inside, and I spoke to her mother, Katie, who became my good friend, because the Yoder family was one family that I interviewed 5 or 6 times, so they became 5 or 6 chapters in my book, whereas other families I just met once and did 1 chapter. But anyway, the first time I met her, you have to imagine, this is a woman who has 10 children and 1 on the way. 2 of her children are already grown and have married and have children of their own and live nearby, 2 of her daughters. So her family is spread over, quite a few years, 20 years. And she has no electricity, no washing machine, automatic washing machine, no car, no telephone. So, what would you expect? 10 children, no telephone, no car, no washing machine. But she came to the door, and there was the most peaceful feeling in her home. And the most peaceful feeling about her, she was quilting with her teenage daughters. This is on a school day. And her middle-aged children were in school. And she was quilting, and her home was completely organized, completely orderly. Everything was in place, and she was just, this was how she was spending her afternoon. And so I told her about the magazine and that it was a Christian-oriented magazine, which, and that I would make sure that she read the article before, you know, if I interviewed her children. I want to interview her children, which to me is a really big request. They were 16 and 18. But anyway, and I said I would let her read the article first so that she could, you know, make sure she agreed with everything that was said. And so she said yes, which was kind of amazing to me. In fact, this is another myth of mine that was shattered, that thinking, you know, of course the Amish are a closed society, but in fact what I found was that, in a lot of ways they were more open than maybe I would even be if a reporter came to my home and wanted to talk to my children. I don't have children, but you know, if they did. So, so anyway, so we spoke a little bit. I didn't get to know Katie that well right then, but I did get to know her daughters. And her daughters, Regina, and that's the name in the book, but Ida Mae and Emma were 16 and 18. And they now are grown and have children of their own. But, and actually I'm going to read a section later on where Emma talks about her marriage. But these two sisters were such a delight. They were so thrilled to get outside because they didn't like to quilt. They were young. And I'm not going to read that much, just a little bit, just to give you a feeling for what they were like from the book. So, the golden sunlight stretches wide over the Iowa hayfields in early September. At the Yoder farm near Bloomfield, a girl waves a hearty hello. This is Regina. Okay, so I'm sorry, the names are different. Yes, I'm sorry. Let me know if this is loud enough. This is Regina. Pardon?
I know, I agree.
Do you think so? Yeah. Well, but this is for the taping. Should we get a microphone? I think Dina can get a microphone. I'm sorry. I'll speak louder. This is Regina, age 15. Besides household chores, she and her older sister Annie milk their family's cows and drive a team of horses in the fields. The girls laugh merrily when they talk. Some people think we are twins, especially when we dress the same, says Annie with a laugh. Today they wear identical raspberry-colored dresses, white aprons, and royal blue scarves tied under their chins. Both say they'd rather spend their day in the fields than inside the house. I think it's great fun to work out, says Regina. I feel more free outside, agrees Annie in her mild way. Farm work doesn't have to be done so fine and neat as needlework. Their day starts at 6 a.m. when their father wakes up the 8 children who still live at home. Before breakfast, the girls feed the cows while their father and 22-year-old brother Dan feed the horses. All 4 help with the milking, and then Dan goes off to work as a carpenter. So what that means really is that these 2 girls are the only people to help the father in the fields. And so this was another myth of mine that was shattered, and that I thought that among the Amish there was very strict gender differences, gender roles. And of course there are. The women do mainly the housework, and the men mainly do the field work or work in a business. But yet I found that there was a lot of crossover. For instance, these girls loved to work with horses. They loved to be outside, so they would help plow the fields. And they would work outside as much as they could. And actually you'll find that when the families are young, before they're teenage boys or whatever to help, the wife will help in the fields too. And the Amish really admire this. They admire a woman who can also work outside. And also it worked the other way too, I found, that the men would often help the wives, especially when the families were young. I found that, for instance, this is actually a really excellent book written by another Iowan, Martha Moore Davis. This is available at our library. It's called Sarah's Seasons, an Amish Diary and Conversation. Martha Moore Davis was born in Kelowna, and then she moved to Des Moines, but she went back to Kelowna and became friends with she was visiting, and became friends with an Amish woman, Sarah Fisher. And Sarah Fisher shared her diary with her. And this is a wonderful insight into an Amish woman's life, if you're interested in this. I guess we'll have to look up.
This is actually supposed to click on here.
Oh, okay. Got another one. How's that? Thank you. We have two. I've got two in here now. Maybe I'll put it on the outside. Maybe on the other, there. How's that? Will that work? I think. And to think I spent an hour figuring out what I was going to wear tonight. But unfortunately, I did pick something with a pocket. That was good.
Did you say wrote that book?
When did I write the book or she?
No.
She, let's see. Oh, Martha Moore Davis.
Okay.
It's available at the library, I think, right? The Sarah Seasons? Pretty sure. Yeah, I think so. Anyway, in this book, Sarah Fisher, her friend, she's now a woman of 70 or so, but at the time of writing her diary, she was a young woman. And, excuse me, but can you hear now? Is that okay?
It's making you louder.
Okay,
There are
good.
some of us who have a little...
Okay, I'm really sorry. I should have checked that from the start.
That's better.
There, is that better? So you can hear now? Oh, good. So, anyway, she in her diary, she talks a lot about her husband helping her with the household chores because she has young children and her husband would come home and he would help her with the dishes. She'd say, I didn't finish the dishes, but, you know, my husband, I forgot his name, would do them, or he'd hang out the laundry, or he'd, you know, help her, work alongside her with the chores. And also, another thing I found out on 2 different occasions was the men sometimes will even, on special occasions, join in on the quilting. And this, I guess I won't walk over there. So they, like, for instance, someone was talking about, one of the women who quilts was talking about an anniversary quilt that a whole family made for the grandmother and grandfather. And it had the grandmother and grandfather's names, and then the, you know, the dates of their marriage. And then they had a square that each grandchild or child did. And the men and boys each quilted their own square as well. They all did it. And then also in North Carolina, I went to a quilting. And at the quilting, it was actually one of these quiltings that they do about once, most Amish communities do about once every month. And they make comforters or quilts for relief. They send them, they make 10 or so in a session, all these women over their own quilting frames, 10 or so in a session, and then they send them off to Romania or Russia or some to even Haiti, where they said they weren't used for warmth but for sitting on. But anyway, and they said that the men and boys, a lot of times whole families will come in the evening and the men and boys will help finish off the quilts. So I found that this was interesting because maybe it's not quite as rigid as we might think in terms of the gender roles. There's definitely some flexibility there. So I want to also tell you a little bit about meeting Leona Peachy. Leona Peachy is a woman who lives in Kelowna, Iowa, and she was unmarried for most of her 65 years. But then she met a man who was a widower and got married late in life. And the way I met Leona is really interesting because I didn't meet her in Kelowna at first. I met her, I found out about her in North Carolina. I was doing an article for a Plain magazine and I was supposed to visit the Amish community in North Carolina, the Bull Shoals community, and just sort of find out what it was like and write about my experience of being with them for a day. Well, it was kind of an amazing experience because all of them, I went from house to house. They would tell me where to go next, to a quilting, to someone's farm, to someone's jelly factory, to a store. And in every place, they were just unbelievably open. And like at the store, I bought some things, and the man there, he'd never met me before and didn't know, really, I guess he knew I was writing the article, but because I told him, but he made a gift of most of the food, the rolls and things I was trying to buy. He said, no, here, this is a gift. But people were like that all day long. So I met one family, the Peachy family, and when you meet an Amish person, one of the first things you do is you connect with them about who you know. And this is kind of funny because when I'm with the Amish people now, I can name a lot of people, who they might know. Oh, do you know so-and-so in Kelowna, or do you know so-and-so in Bloomfield or North Carolina? And they just think this is so hilarious that I know so many connections. So anyway, so we were talking about people that they knew back in Kelowna, because they knew I came from Iowa. And so they said, oh, well, you should meet our father, Jess Peachy. He just got married, and he's, going to be living in Kelowna now, so you should go by there. And they gave me his name and his address. So one time when I was driving up to Iowa City, I did stop by. And, in the country, you can just stop by because the Amish people don't have telephones. So it's just like how it used to be in this country for everyone. If someone comes, you just come whenever you come. And if they're having dinner, you eat with them, or if whatever they're doing, you join in. And, or they stop what they're doing to visit with you. Well, in this case, Leona was there, but Jess wasn't. So I never actually did meet Jess. But I met Leona, and I explained who I was, and she just immediately was totally tickled that this was, that I was a friend of her husband's family. And she was, so she invited me and also a friend who was with me inside, and she was quilting with her sister. It turns out her sister Mary, who was no longer with the old order Amish in Kelowna, but had joined the Beachy Amish and could drive a car, had driven over, but otherwise looked exactly like, dressed exactly the same. In Kelowna, you'll find there's all these different, sects and that, so it's kind of hard to keep it all straight. But anyway, so they were in there, and I don't know, they were showing, for one thing, they had photographs of quilts. And I said to Leona, I said, oh, well, I thought you couldn't have photographs. She says, oh, well, it's okay if someone else takes them. So and actually, on that note, Katie Yoder told me that I once said something like, oh, how do you feel when you see books that have photographs of the Amish? And she said, because I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Amish don't allow themselves to be photographed unless they're a child. Sometimes they'll allow, or from a distance, or if they're not looking, not posing, because the Bible says not to have a graven image of God, and man being in the image of God, they feel that there shouldn't be a photograph made of them. So I said to Katie Yoder once, well, don't you, how do you feel when you see these books with photographs of Amish people? And then she said, oh, we love it. She said, because we don't really know what we look like in photographs, and it's fun for us to see, other Amish people. So it was interesting. But anyway, Leona Peachy and her sister Mary were having just such a fun time quilting, and we sat down with them, and I don't know what happened, but I find this happens often when I'm with Amish people, that because there's no television, there's no telephone, in fact, they're not ever watching television or having that kind of entertainment. Their entertainment is talking to other people. So they have sort of refined, I feel, this art of conversation. And also, I think because just of their whole philosophy of life and their kind of sheltered existence, I feel they do relate more from the heart. That's been my experience anyway, in a lot of ways. And so, I don't know what happened, but for some reason, the four of us sat down and we just started talking and just started laughing and just started connecting in a way that was very unusual for four strangers. And we just were laughing and talking, and it was just one of the most pleasant afternoons I think I've ever spent. And we were just looking at these quilts, and she was telling stories about the different quilts. She and her sister actually make quilts professionally for people from all over, from Cedar Rapids and Des Moines and all over the place and they order customized quilts, and they were really excellent, beautiful colors, beautiful quilts. And so we just talked and just had one of the best times. And I think that's one of the nicest things about Amish life, is just that the whole thing is really structured around being human. It's structured around the family, it's structured around the faith, obviously, that's very important to them, and the community. One of the reasons they told me that they don't, there's a chair here, Mary. Oh, you got one? Okay. One of the reasons that they told me that they don't drive cars, I think there are many reasons, but one is that if they drove cars, they would drive far, they could drive out of the community to buy things, and then they wouldn't be supporting their local merchants, and then the local merchants would go out of business and there would no longer be a community. And so they feel that they should support the community. And I think that this is one of the most important things, really one of the biggest advantages for the women in Amish society, is that everything in the society, all the decisions that are made, are geared towards supporting the family and supporting the children and supporting the elderly. And so I think that makes a very secure existence for the women and for the children and for the elderly. And There's never anyone left alone. There's never any, if a woman doesn't marry, which, there are many who don't, well, not many, but there are some, they can always find a place where they're welcome to live either in someone else's home or even on their own, and can pursue a business or work in some way, or feel useful and contribute to the society. But there's definitely a place for everyone, every woman in Amish society. I had one other person. Are there any questions before we go? Anybody? Yeah.
Do they all speak English?
Well, yeah, they do. They speak really good English. The Amish actually don't speak English as their mother tongue, though. They speak Pennsylvania Deutsch, which Deutsch means German, but that word was corrupted and became Pennsylvania Dutch, which is, Pennsylvania Dutch is not Dutch. It's not from the Netherlands, it's German. It's this Low German, it's called a Low German or dialect, that comes from German Switzerland and also from Germany. And so they speak that. It's not a written language. It's completely a spoken language. There is no past tense or future tense in that language. There's only a present tense, which I think is also interesting and maybe shapes some of their own worldview of living more in the present. I don't know. But anyway, so they learn that. That's what they speak at home all the time. It's their mother tongue. So the child grows up learning Pennsylvania Dutch or Deutsch. And then when they go to school at age 6, which they go to school only till the 8th grade, they must speak English at school. So they learn English at school, and they learn to speak it perfectly well. And they learn to write in English. So when they write letters, which they do a lot of, writing letters, they write in English. And so it's interesting. And then they learn a third language when they want to join the church, and they have to go to German school, and actually even adults continue kind of to go to German school all their lives. But they learn a High German, which is used in their songs, which are probably the oldest recorded Christian songs. It's from the Ausbund, which is from the 14th century. Very beautiful singing. That's a whole other subject, though. But anyway, they learn that, and also the sermons are preached in High German. So they have to learn High German to go to, they go to church even as children, but they have to learn to become Amish, to become part of the church. Yes, Mary?
Is that true in all the communities? I mean, in Kelowna, that's how they speak, and in
Yeah.
the same traditions held up.
Yes. Although some of the preschoolers learn a little English if they're in contact with English neighbors. Like some of the mothers said, well, my son already knew some English when he went to school because he would hear us speaking with the neighbors. And so some of them learn a little more English than others. It depends on what their family's occupation is, pretty much. But yeah.
Some of my friends have heard this story, but I had cousins visiting me who were not familiar with the Amish, and since our historical society had visited the Yoders and the Lebanon area, when they were here visiting, I felt maybe that I could stop and visit, and sure enough, she was good. But cousin had a camera over her shoulder, and she says, but don't take pictures of her faces, something to that effect. Well, the laundry was hanging on the line, black laundry, long string of it, and this intrigued cousin, but she didn't want to be obvious. So finally, there was a little pony there. She said, "Could I take a picture of your pony?" She got that in front of the black clothes, so she.
Because she felt it was too personal to ask to take a picture of the laundry. Yeah, that's a great story. That's good. Well, yes, they don't seem to mind if you take pictures of their ponies or their houses and things like that. So
buggies.
Or their buggies, right? So, yeah, that's great. So good. Yes.
You said they write letters, so they use the post office.
Oh, yes. They use the post office and even UPS. And they write letters. In fact, they do this thing called, what do they call the circle letter? Yeah, round robin, like the round robin circle letter. Actually, it's talked about in Sarah's Seasons, where one person will write to the next person, and the next person will write to the next, and add on to the letter. And they have a group that they do this with continually or once in a while, and it's just to share. And also, they have a newspaper called The Budget. And The Budget is basically a series of letters from each community. There's one person who is the scribe or the reporter, and they write what happened like that week. Like, for instance, the Yoders had visitors from Montana, and there were, it was too cold for the Hirschbergers to go to church on Sunday, and someone left a shoe in the middle of the road, and would they please come and pick it up? And funny incidents too, like about I don't know, about someone getting kicked over the fence by a goat or something. But it's very sweet. And this is how the reason I brought that up was that this is how they keep in contact, because they have such huge families, and they move and start new communities quite often. That's one of the things, that if a person becomes disgruntled with the rules of their own community, or it's just too crowded, or for whatever reasons, they can go and start a new community elsewhere. And so there's a lot of movement back and forth and around. And so to keep in touch with people all over the country who you might know who have moved somewhere, the budget is a wonderful way of doing that. It's big paper. And so that's another way they write letters too. And that's all in English. So I wanted to just tell you about one other woman who I met who had become Amish. And this is actually very unusual. Not many people convert to become Amish, for one reason, because the Amish don't evangelize. They really don't. And I think that was, for me, because I didn't ever feel they wanted me to become like them, they were never trying to, there was never an effort for them to try to convert me to be like them or something, and more from my side. And I think that made it comfortable for us to be together, because I obviously came from a very different background, and they never really asked me too much about what I did, but they didn't mind that I asked them questions about them, and they just would answer them very, very simply and very honestly, but they didn't really expect me to live up to their standards or to be like them. They accepted me for who I was, and I think that's a really beautiful quality. And you find that among all the Amish. They may have very strict rules about how they dress or how they behave, but they don't expect everyone else to be the same. They just want the freedom to live their own lives and to be who they are, and they aren't expecting other people to join them. But there was this group in North Carolina who were called New Order Amish, and they were a little bit more on the evangelical side. And so they had a family that had actually joined them. Actually, I have the wrong book. This was another book that one of my essays appeared in. It was a book that was edited by Scott Savage, the editor of Plain magazine. It's called The Plain Reader. It was a collection of stories from Plain. It was published by Bantam Books. And one of my articles was put in there. And this woman's name was Margaret Coletti. She was about 17. And she had been Catholic before. She said, my parents were active in the Catholic Church. The whole family became Amish. And she said they felt living a Christian life was important but hard to do in the environment we were in. And so actually first they became Mennonite and then they became Amish. And so she was living there, and she was dressed just like the other Amish women. And when I asked her what it's like to adjust to the Amish way of life, she laughs. She had a wonderful laugh, actually. I should have read the description here. When I arrived there, Margaret Coletti steps outside the old white farmhouse to greet me. She has dark hair that comes to a slight widow's peak in front, blue eyes, and a vivacious voice full of laughter. She is just 2 months short of 21. We sit at the kitchen table to chat. So then I asked her what it's like to adjust to the Amish way of life, and I guess I probably looked a little, apprehensive or something, but she just laughed. And she said, I have found peace and contentment in my way of life here. I like the closeness of the Amish way. I feel we have a support system, which the world sadly lacks. Just for example, I'm getting married in September to an Amish boy from Canada. I needed to make my quilt, but our family's not that great at quilting yet. So the women and girls of the church have come for 3 different frolics, and it's almost done. She shows me her quilt stretched on a frame in the next room, covered with painstakingly tiny stitches. You have to get 7 or 8 stitches on the needle at once, she said. It is amazing how they quilt. So that was, it was really fun to meet her. And actually there was another story that happened that kind of came from this, and that is that the Amish don't actually what they call publish or announce their wedding plans until 2 weeks before the wedding. And I guess just because they don't want to make a fuss about it. So The Amish wedding is really a big fuss, though, because there may be like 250 or 300 people invited, and the seating, the ceremony is in the neighbor's home, and then the meals, there are actually 2 meals served on the wedding day. A dinner, which means their noon meal after the service in the church. They don't actually have a church. I should explain that. They have church services in their own home. So that would be at the neighbor's home, so that all the meal and all of the tables could be set up for 250 people in the bride's home. And then they have a supper as well. So this is a huge endeavor. And so what happens is that when a boy and girl are courting, everyone sort of knows, but they don't pay too much attention. But they do kind of look to see if the bride's family is planting a lot of celery, because that's a sure sign that they'll be using the stuffing for the wedding. Well, anyway, in this article, she just said to me, "I'm getting married to an Amish boy from Canada." Well, so I wrote it down and I published it in the article. Well, it came out in Plain Magazine, and it turned out that the boy's uncle, Ben Luthi was the boy actually, and his uncle David Wagler, who's kind of an irascible fellow, he's a writer himself, and he told me the story himself when I met him. And he said that he immediately wrote to his nephew and said, "Oh, I guess you're getting married." And it created quite a stir, because no one was supposed to know, but she had kind of announced it unwittingly. And I had published it unwittingly. I guess that I think she just didn't think that it was going to get back to anybody in Canada, this magazine. But the Amish world is a small world. So I wanted to just tell you a little bit about Amish marriage customs, courtship and marriage customs. I thought you might be interested in that. And then I'll read a section where Katie Yoder talks about her own marriage, and Emma, her daughter, well, actually, the one called Anna, and from the section I read earlier, talks about her marriage as well. I thought you might enjoy that. So the Amish don't get married all that young. They don't start dating till they're 18, at least in the community here in Bloomfield. Years ago, it may have been younger, and in other communities, it may vary as well. But in the community in Bloomfield, they don't start courting till they're 18, after they've joined the church. So once they've joined the church, then they are prepared to start an Amish life together. And they might date by going to singings together. That's one of the ways that young people meet. They have they have church services only every other Sunday. So in the evening after the church service in the person's home, they'll have a singing for the young people, and they'll sing half gospel songs, which are in English, and half of the German songs that are High German and are sung in the church, very slow. That's an amazing thing, that the singing, actually. If you ever have an opportunity to go to an Amish church service, it is really an amazing experience. It's long, 2 hours, and you sit on very hard benches. But it's really incredible. The singing it's done without any musical instruments, because that's not allowed, and not even a pitch pipe. So the lead singer, who is a young man usually, has to come in completely on key, just cold. And he sings a long, slow kind of phrase. And then the women and the men join in, and they sing all one part, as they call it, or not in harmony. They sing all the same melody. And the women, though, sing it kind of more as swooping high notes, and the men more low, droning kind of notes. And the whole experience is sort of one like a chanting, but it's also joyful, but it's also kind of a dirge. It's hard to explain. It's a very emotional kind of experience. And also it's very slow, and usually the more conservative the church district is, the more they're conservative they are, then the slower they sing their songs. But I found that when I was trying to follow, I would keep trying to turn the page, and where are they? But it took them 15 minutes just to get down to the bottom of one page. That's how slowly it was sung. So the singings are partly those songs and part gospel songs, which are in English. And then after the singing, a boy might take a girl home in his buggy, which he's received from his parents at age 16. He becomes mobile. He gets his own horse and buggy. And so he could take a girl home, from the singing. And then they might sit up in her kitchen for a while. Or he might come and visit sometime when the family's in bed, and he might throw stones at her window. It's all very romantic. And they might come down and visit in the kitchen, but it's all in secret. Nobody's supposed to know. Nobody's supposed to, the younger brothers might tease or something, but it's not supposed to pay a lot of attention to the couple who's courting. And then 2 weeks before the wedding, they announce it to the community, and then it's public. So that's kind of the story. And they're not chosen. They choose their own mates. It's not like the marriages are arranged or anything like that. So I almost don't recognize the Yoder farm when I drive up. But fortunately, Nancy, that's the name in the book for Katie, they asked that their names be changed. I gave them the choice when the book was coming out. And actually, the Yoder family said, well, we don't want to change our last name because there's so many Yoders, no one would recognize us. But we want to change our first name. But then later, Katie told me she regretted it because she said when she reads the book now, she feels like it's about some other family. But I almost don't recognize the Yoder farm when I drive up. But fortunately, Nancy, her arms loaded with clothes from the clothesline, greets me. Baby Wayne, now a young boy of 5, stands by the door. I realize it has been nearly 4 years since I visited. So we sit in her living room talking. In this community, the children start going to young folks gatherings at 16, says Nancy. But they don't start dating until 18. They usually join the Amish church before starting to date. Through the week, there might be gatherings just every now and then, whenever anybody wants to do something, adds her daughter Grace. The young people may play volleyball games in summer, and in winter go ice skating, says Nancy. There might be special gatherings for harvesting nuts or stacking wood. Parents chaperone the gatherings. Like if Toby and I invited the young people for a taffy pull, we'd be there with them, says Nancy. Then in the evening, they'd play games in the living room. Grace says that her group plays such games as Congress or Catchphrase, a word game you can buy at Walmart. Card games such as Skippo, Uno, and Dutch Blitz are also favorites. Dutch Blitz is an Amish game. In Amish society, young folks choose their own marriage partners. To begin with, the church asks the boys and girls who are dating age to pray to the Lord who their partner should be, says Nancy. As long as he's attending church in good standing, we let our daughters choose. We don't try to make it our business. Oh, sometimes the boy has had to settle down a bit before the parents will let him date their daughter. That has happened, she smiles. I can see that Nancy feels restless with nothing to do with her hands. I'm not surprised then when she calls Wayne, who pushes a toy truck along an imaginary road on the living room floor. Ask Grace for the white shirt you wore last Sunday, she says to him. I want to change the sleeves. He brings it to her. Let me measure on your arm. She holds the white shirt sleeve up to his arm. Nancy never dated anyone steadily except Toby. Was she thinking about him before he asked her? Afterwards, I thought I had been, but at the time I felt surprised, she says. I knew him before, but just kind of saw him around. I didn't know his ways until after I started dating. He always liked horses. It wasn't long before I figured that out, but I didn't mind that because I loved horses too. Nancy and Toby dated 2.5 years. During that time, they saw each other at least once a week, sometimes twice, but hardly ever more than that. What does an Amish couple look for in each other? Even though we have the same religion and lifestyle, it's possible we might not agree on some things, says Nancy. When you're dating, you want to know, do you like each other? Would he be a good father? Do you have a happy time? And is there a good feeling when you're together? With 4 of their 7 daughters married, Nancy and Toby are used to putting on weddings. Nancy says with a laugh, after Annie's wedding, Toby said, well, we're over halfway with the weddings. All of her married children live nearby, and she can go visit them just down the road, either walking or taking her horse and buggy to visit her grandchildren. Nancy says in their community, young people get married throughout the year, not just in the fall. In a lot of Amish communities, the fall is the time they get married because the harvest is over. Our daughters can't marry except in the spring or summer. We don't have enough room indoors. For their first daughter's wedding, they built a large metal shed in the back. That's where they hold all their wedding meals and also church when it's their turn to host the service. The Yoders invited 250 guests to Annie's wedding. The service took place at a neighbor's house. Then everyone arrived at the bride's home for the noon meal. At weddings, 20 to 25 ladies help the bride's mother cook the meal, and they call them the chief cooks, says Nancy. All I do that day is walk around and tell them what to do. But oh, your head just about spins. There may be 6 or 7 ladies to peel potatoes, usually 100 pounds, and they make that into mashed potatoes. 4 or 5 ladies do the meat. I have to tell them how I want it cooked. There's a lot of seeing after, that's for sure. Nancy, who married at age 19, talks easily about her marriage. I was plenty young. We were married in '68 and had our first daughter 1 year and 3 months later. Of course, I was ready for a baby by then. She says that, yes, an Amish wife is supposed to be obedient to her husband. I asked her that question. And he definitely is the head of the household. But she also says, Toby and I like to be more equal when we make decisions. If the husband is like most of them, he will get his wife's say and see what she thinks before making a decision. She says her husband is her friend and the pillar of the farm. The Amish value harmony and family life above all. We just learned from young up that when you marry, it's for life. I think if you live close to God and trust in God, it all works together. Building up the community, being a good influence to everyone, and especially to the younger generation is important. What is the major challenge to Amish marriages? That stumps Nancy for a while. If the husband and wife are obedient like they should be and have God with them in their home, there shouldn't be any problems. I just don't know what the problem would be. She herself couldn't remember any major challenges in her own marriage. Later, as if she's been thinking about that question, she says, there have been little things, like when the children were young and I needed more drawer space. But he was so busy and didn't want to stop his work on the farm to go find a dresser. I remember that kind of upset me. Later, we did buy a couple of used dressers. I guess you just kind of have to wait until the time is right. We are taught to be patient, and that goes a long way. She's been married 31 years. We've had some conflicts, but they weren't so big that we couldn't talk them over. That's the main thing. If you did say things you shouldn't have, you can say you're sorry and ask for forgiveness. That goes a long way. Is it true that Amish parents try not to argue in front of the children? I respect the ones who don't argue, she says with a smile. But sometimes things have to be said now, whether the children are there or not. She also said that it's important to talk things over in marriage and to be careful it doesn't become a big issue. We decided to go visit Annie. Like Nancy's other married children, Annie lives nearby. We're just human, that's it, says Nancy as she ties on her black outside bonnet. Only we have more rules to live by than other people, and we try to live by those rules with God's help. God is really the head of the household. So, and then we talked to Annie, and I just want to read what she says about her marriage, because it's very interesting. In between customers, we chat with Annie, who will be going straight to the barn to chore when she gets off work. She's a newlywed. She says she can't remember when she first met Lester. He lived across the field and went to the same church, but to a different school. I just knew him. We had our first date the same evening as Dan and Betty. That's her sister and her husband's, no, that's her brother and her husband's sister who married each other. But I noticed him before that. She also knew his parents. Did she want him to ask her on a date? Oh, yes, she says with a quick smile. But she says she didn't talk about it. You don't want other people to know who you like, other than your closest friend. They dated for 3 years before they married. Were they in love? I would say it would really be more like a quiet, deep love and friendship, says Annie. It's not like romance books. Oh, but you did go around with stars in your eyes and your head in the clouds, remembers Nancy. I sometimes had to remind you to get back to earth. When he asked her to marry him, it was no shock, she says. He would sometimes say, if I were married, I would. We talked it over. But he had to ask the question sometime, adds Nancy. Although they didn't call it a honeymoon, Annie and her husband took a train trip out west after their marriage. 2 other couples accompanied them. Dan and his wife Betty, along with Annie's older sister Darla and her husband. Oh yes, says Annie when I ask if her husband is her best friend. A sparkling smile flashes across her face. And I sure wouldn't want to be single again. So far, she foresees no difficulties in her marriage. Not if we both do our part, Annie says with great conviction. which is just trying to keep each other happy and not to ever want to start arguing. She says that her husband is very considerate and that you just try to agree with each other. Would married friends talk to each other about everyday problems? Oh, I think so, says Nancy. If the sisters are real good friends, I think they discuss things. I and mine do anyway. Annie says she's never heard of any need for marriage counseling in the community. What would a couple having trouble do? Talk to the minister, says Annie. I wonder aloud if Amish marriages are more harmonious because from childhood on people are taught to serve others rather than thinking about what I want, what I need. Everyone has that tendency, says Nancy. In church we are taught that everybody must try not to think about themselves but to think about others. And if you think about others first, it goes better, says Annie. It's the way we are raised, says Nancy. So we don't know any different. Just like we don't miss TV, we don't miss the things we've never had. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really beautiful description of a very happy Amish marriage and happy Amish home, which I felt that the Yoders really were very contented and happy people with their challenges, of course, but still happy. And I'm not trying to say that all Amish families are that way. Obviously, there are some that are unhappy. And of course, it's a very difficult thing. I should mention, of course, for an Amish woman, if she found herself in an unhappy marriage, because there is no possibility of divorce if you want to stay Amish. And a woman who has only an 8th grade education and perhaps has young children to raise would find herself in a very, very difficult situation if she were unhappy, if there were problems such as abuse, which could happen. So, I'm not trying to say that this is representative of all Amish marriages or anything like that. Yes?
Is it hard for young people in Amish religion to find people to date that are your cousins in these communities?
Yes, well, it is a difficulty in that they don't marry first cousins, but in the larger, it's actually in some ways a bigger problem in the larger communities because what happens there is that sometimes, even if they don't really know it, they aren't first cousins, it could be that they're related on both sides of the family tree. And in the larger communities, actually, it's more of a problem, such as Lancaster or Holmes County, Ohio, which is the largest community in the country, because then they don't tend to go to other communities to marry. They tend to intermarry amongst, with the young people in their own communities. So this happens more, and there is a higher incidence of genetic disease. And so that's a really big problem, and it's a problem of education. For some reason, the Amish people have not picked this up and educated themselves about the dangers of genetic disease. Instead, they take it more as like, they're very kind and loving to anyone who is ill, or, they just take it as something God has God has given them, a child who's ill, and so therefore that's, they should handle it, but they're not looking at what the cause. So yes, it's a problem, and not as much, it seems, in the smaller communities, because there they know who, they can't marry first cousins, and they're not tended to be. The smaller communities are newer, so they're not going to be related on both sides of the family tree, probably. And they may actually marry someone from another community because the young people meet each other at weddings. And for instance, as Margaret Coletti met the boy from Canada. So yeah, it's a good question. Are there other questions? Yes?
Who takes on the role of the minister?
Well, that's an interesting question. The Amish have they actually draw lots. It could be, they nominate, like, say, 6 or 7 men, 5 or 6 men, and then they put a piece of paper in one Bible, and they each take a Bible, the bishop, someone else has already done that, and then they each select a Bible, and the one that has the paper in it, he becomes the new minister. And it's considered to be, of course, a great honor, but not necessarily something you want to happen, because the Amish take it very seriously. It's considered to be a kind of a weight, a burden to be, a spokesperson for God. And also, it is a burden because they have to prepare these long sermons, 1 or 2 hour sermons, with scriptural references every week, and that's on top of their own, their own responsibilities as farmers or businessmen or whatever it is that they're doing to support their families. So that's how they're chosen.
Are they licensed to marry?
Pardon?
They're licensed to marry.
To marry people? I actually don't know that question. I don't know if it's like a legal, must be, but I really don't know if they sign legal papers. That's a good question. I should ask. Yeah. Yes.
How long did you serve?
Life. Yeah, so it's a really big responsibility. Unless they get sick or something, happens in the family, then they really don't ever let it go. So something big. Yes.
What happens to the children who are restless and want to learn more than 8th grade? Who want to go on with their
Yeah,
things?
that's obviously a big drawback with Amish society. And, the Amish do, pardon?
How do they get the medical, if they have emergency, how do they get medicine?
Well, they take advantage of medical services, and they usually have a neighbor who's an English neighbor who they have arranged with. They can go and use their phone. Some Amish communities have a phone booth, like out in the middle between the farms. Other Amish communities have their phone in the schoolhouse, which is pretty much within a mile or two of every farm. So they have ways of getting to phones when it's a medical emergency. The Yoder family actually, I didn't read that part, but right when I came to visit her the last time, her 10-year-old son was recovering from a ruptured appendix. And he laid down after lunch and he said, "Mom, I just don't feel right." So they took him in their buggy to the hospital, which was, about 4 miles away. But other times, I guess that they felt they could make it in time, but other people might call and have an ambulance come, or have a neighbor drive them.
And the education issue, how about the education? The people who are restless and want to know.
Yeah, well, so if they really wanted to have more education, they would have to leave the Amish community. And, if they didn't become part of the church first, then they could leave, they could become Mennonite. For instance, a lot of the people in Kelowna, there's a lot of Mennonites in Kelowna who were Amish at one point in their lineage, or maybe even recently. And so they could become Mennonite and still be friends and still see their families. It's actually quite of a nice situation in Kelowna. In some communities, though, if they left, if they decide not to become Amish, they wouldn't really be welcomed home that much. Maybe at Christmas, or like Katie Yoder told me, one of her friend's sons didn't become Amish or Mennonite, and she said her friend said, "Well, he can come home at Christmas, but I'm not going to invite him." It's really a very big heartbreak, when the children don't find satisfaction in the Amish life and want to leave. And it's even more of a heartbreak if they become Amish already, because in some communities, not so much in Kelowna, but in some communities, if they then left after taking the vows, which are for life, to become Amish for life, and then if they left, they would be shunned, which is even more severe. Yeah.
Have you read the book Crossover, and if so, what is your...
I didn't read that book. I'd like to, yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
What's the difference between Amish and Mennonite?
Well, okay, that's a good question. The Amish and Mennonite were one group. I think they were called Mennonites more. They started after the Reformation in Europe, in German Switzerland, and also in the Alsace area, which is between Switzerland and France, and somewhat in Germany. They felt that there were some, they were kind of rebelling against the Reformation. They, for instance, didn't believe that children should be baptized at birth, but should be baptized when they're adults and could make a decision. And there are many other things. That they didn't want to participate in wars. The Amish are pacifists. They don't participate in wars. And so there were a number of other things. So they were followers of a man named Menno. And so then they became Mennonites. But then around the turn of the last century, around the beginning of the 1900s, what happened was that the Mennonites decided that they wanted to embrace more modern technology. And they wanted to embrace telephones and electricity, which were coming and cars eventually. And whereas so there was a split in the church. And so the old order Amish, they took the name, Ammon, Joseph Ammon, who was also one of their forefathers. And the Mennonites split and embraced modern conveniences, and the old order Amish remained as they were, which basically until that time it wasn't such an issue because no one had electricity, or they were basically living as everyone did in America. And but at that point the Amish felt that those things would destroy their communities and would not allow them to retain their identity, which I think is pretty much true because the Mennonites have not been able to maintain as strong an identity in an insular community as the Amish have.
My husband, some of his ancestors were Mennonites.
Oh, yeah.
Pennsylvania. But then some of them did serve in the Civil War.
Mm-hmm. So maybe
Mennonites can,
can serve,
yes, but the Amish don't.
but the Amish don't serve. So, okay. Yes.
Of all the traits of the Amish, what do you consider the best traits that we could adopt? Because they have a lot
Traits?
of life. Yeah,
Traits?
characters, their way of life.
Oh, well, there's a lot because
Well, I think there's so many. They are materialistic minded for one thing.
exactly. They really put, as I said before, I think they put human values and their faith above material things. And I think that's a beautiful quality because when you're with an Amish person, you don't feel that they're going to, kind of shove you aside because they've got to answer the phone or something like that, I don't know, or listen to TV, or something. They really are with you and they're talking to you and they're concerned about you. Their human caring qualities are very great. I think other qualities, patience and I think pacifism. I think their really strong commitment to turning the other cheek, and for forgiveness. I think is certainly a lesson we could all be. That it's a great need in our world today. And
What do you think are the most negative? You didn't mention negative. What did you say?
well, I think the rules. The strictness and the rules, and I think sometimes it can break down and become pettiness. From what I understand, what I've read, when there are maybe too much, maybe that's maybe they're not materialistic, but maybe sometimes they get too focused on the rules and lose the spirit of their lives in those rules or something, and that can be negative. And lack of education, I think, and lack of choices and freedoms. Definitely, those would be drawbacks for me, and for a lot of people. As Nancy said, they don't miss what they don't have. So, and also I did want to bring out one thing, and that is in this book, Amish Women. This was a surprising book for me to read. It's put out by Good Books. Anyway, it's a very simple book. It's written by a woman who grew up Amish but didn't stay Amish. And these little stories, she interviewed different people from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where she was from. Her grandparents told about her parents, her grandparents, and also some other women in the community. And really, it did show that women could be a lot more independent than you might think in the Amish society. Like there was a woman who had a family, but she spent at least 20 hours a week painting because she had a passion for painting, and she sold her work. And, it was a very important thing to her. It was her life in a lot of ways. And then another woman who worked as a medical researcher, trying to investigate some of these, worked for a clinic investigating many of these genetic diseases and collecting information from Amish people, sort of as a liaison between the clinic and to help the Amish people. And another woman who ran a sheep farm by herself. And, so really, she was talking more about the choices. So I think that maybe there are more choices than we would think looking in from the outside. It's difficult for us to judge from the outside what would be like, but there definitely are drawbacks to the shunning, those kind of things. I think that definitely would be hardships. And also the hard physical labor, for me, would be definitely a drawback. But I think if you grew up that way, it's probably natural.
I think the simple lifestyle is a positive thing.
Yes, I think that's definitely a positive, because you feel that. When you're with them, you feel the simplicity of their lives, and just their simple way of, the way they answer questions, like you talk to them and you ask them about themselves or their life, they're happy to talk to you about their faith or their beliefs. And just the way, there's never ever a feeling of covering up or putting on or trying to be something they're not. I think that's a beautiful quality. They're very comfortable with who they are, and I think the children are raised that way. And there's never a feeling of that I'm not good enough or I should be. Sometimes I think they feel that way, that the English, when they're around English, they maybe feel like they're dressed, I think they do feel a little, they feel the difference that way. But still, there's a simplicity about them that is really refreshing, I think.
Everybody should read her book.
Thank you. Yes.
What are their church services
Oh.
like? Do they read scripture?
Yes, well, it's in German. I couldn't understand anything. But they told me about it, and they quote a lot of scripture. They quote, literal. They definitely are like they're not really what we would call fundamentalists because they don't have the same beliefs as many fundamentalist Christians, but yet they're fundamentalists in that they believe in a literal interpretation of the Bible. So they quote a lot of scripture. They had their own stories and homilies and that too. And there was a preacher, when he was preaching at the service I went to, I could tell he was a really gifted speaker. Just the rhythm of his speech and the way he was connecting with the audience and that. And there's a lot of singing and praying, quiet praying. And, they pray at the beginning and the end of every meal. That's an interesting point. And they have a really lovely church dinner after every meal, which they say is simple. It's always the same, every sort of sandwiches and sandwich spreads and things. They say they keep it simple so the women don't try to work too hard. It's a day of rest for them as well. But it was amazing the way they would set up. They would first of all, they cleared all the benches out of the living room. They opened up the walls. The kitchen was more for the nursing mothers, so they could have the children there and nurse in privacy. And then the women beside them, and like say in the dining room, and then across in the living room were the men. And the preacher would talk to both groups stand between. But then the men, they're just so incredibly efficient. Their society is so orderly. I think that's one of the main unbelievable things about it. And then also one of the things that adds peacefulness to their society because they raise their children the way they were raised. They teach their children the way they were taught. There's a continuity which makes for simplicity as well. But anyway, they immediately picked up all the benches and stacked them in the church wagon, which goes from house to house. And then they put out the tables, and they had many different seatings. And the thing that was curious to me was they would do the prayer that they just fall into silence at the beginning and the end of the meal. No one would tell them when. They just did it all at the same time. Maybe they had a time that I didn't ever ask anyone. Maybe there was a special time that they did it, but anyway, and then the next seating would happen. And the servers would be the neighbors of the family who had the service. They are all enlisted. Everyone knows who they're supposed to be helping. And so the servers are the neighbors and the young women, and they'd pour the drinks and set out the food and clear it.
The seating, did the children eat first and then?
Yeah, the children, the nursing mothers, and the older people, and then they'd go down the line. Yeah.
Do you know why they don't have musical instruments in their church?
Well, I think it's similar to why they don't have machinery well, they do have machinery, but why they don't have electricity.
No musical instruments at all?
No, not even a pitch pipe. There was a question back here, yes.
Like on Sunday, do they restrict the young people from playing ball or playing table games or something?
No, they can play games, usually quiet games. They play games, they definitely play table games. And like Dutch Bliss, or they have a game called Bible Trivia they play on Sundays. But they really have fun at their parties. They enjoy, I don't know, they get kind of wild. They play this one game called Cat and Mouse. And it's played with a frying pan lid and a spool of thread, a spool on a string. And the frying pan lid is the cat and tries to bang down on top of that spool, which is the mouse. And so that you try to jerk the mouse out before the person with the frying pan lid. So they have a lot of fun. And when the young people are together, they often play volleyball and things like that. But probably not, I'm not sure about on Sunday. They try to play more quiet games on Sundays, but not like the Puritans, not where they're sitting in their chairs or something. They enjoy life pretty much. And Sunday is the day of rest and just enjoyment. Yes.
I read someplace that there's some period during a young person's upbringing where they're allowed to go wild.
Yeah, it's called Rumspringa, or running around. And it's true. They start going to the singings, and the boy gets his horse and buggy around 16, but they don't really join the church till they're 18. There are at least 2 years where they're kind of, being teenagers, and they go to these gatherings and things. But some of the children will, some of the teenagers may try out Western ways, and they say that the parents try to look the other way in that case because they want them to know what they're getting into and want them to make an informed choice. even though they don't want them to run wild. But so they may put a transistor radio in their buggy, or they may actually purchase a car with some other boys and hide it on the farm. Which I don't know, how could you really hide a car? So the father must know. And then, you know, or they may change clothes when they go into town, you know, hide their Amish clothes in the bushes and put on street clothes and go to a movie. You know, there's all these things that could happen. Also, maybe you read in the news up in, what's the Hazelton, the Buchanan County, the Amish up there, which is actually the most strict Amish community in the state, and maybe in a lot of places. The young people there, you know, how it happens, sometimes the strictest places, the young people are the wildest, but anyway, they have drinking parties, apparently, and where they, you know, just after the singings, or during, maybe some of those kids are drinking or something. So there was some incident where they would, you know, ransack somebody's house, something, were put in jail. But there's actually a funny thing about that. After a few days, the police let them go because they felt that the boys were enjoying the television in the jail. I guess we should probably, I guess we were supposed to end about 8 o'clock, so I'm sorry to have kept you all, but it was so much fun talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Linda. We really, really like that.
Thank you.
I forgot to tell you that Friends of the Library support Women's Night In, and Friends, you need to know that Linda was very generous to you. I do have a door prize, and would you just like to draw one piece of mine out, Susan? What's the number? 30.
Ooh.
Susan Pavelka. We don't have tables to sit at tonight. That made it easier for the staff. So just help yourself. If you'd like to take your treats into the library, the internet is on. I have a computer on if you want to check anything out. If you want to stay in here and sit, that's fine.
And I'm happy to answer any questions if any of you had more. Thank you.
I was at Dr. Phillips back here.